What happens when the very person sworn to protect community becomes its ultimate betrayer? In a small town where trust was a way of life, a secret relationship spiraled into a scandal that would forever shatter the peace. This is the chilling story of a sheriff, a young girl, and a web of deception that led to unimaginable consequences. In every town, there exists a rhythm, a steady, predictable beat that gives life its comforting familiarity. The streets are filled with the sound of children playing tag, their laughter echoing against neatly trimmed hedges and picket fences. Shopkeepers greet customers by name, and neighbors linger by their mailboxes, sharing the latest news about the high school football game or a local bake sale. This is the kind of town where doors are left unlocked, where the biggest scandal in years might be a broken hydrant or a stray dog on the loose. It's a place that feels like home, even to a stranger passing through. At the heart of this town's tranquility is trust, a fragile but binding thread that connects its people. Here, trust isn't just earned, it's assumed. You trust your neighbors to watch your house while you're on vacation. You trust your teachers to guide your children with care. Most importantly, you trust the sheriff, the man in uniform who swore an oath to protect and serve. In this town, the sheriff wasn't just a lawman, he was a symbol of safety. He was the one who made you feel secure when you heard a bump in the night, the one who stood at the parade, tipping his hat and shaking hands with pride. Sheriff Clayton Marshall was that man. His patrol car parked outside the diner during breakfast hours was as much a fixture as the coffee brewing inside. Parents waved to him on their morning walks, and kids idolized him, seeing him as a real-life hero. To the townspeople, he was more than a public servant. He was one of them, a father, a husband, a neighbor. People didn't just respect Clayton, they admired him. But trust is a peculiar thing. It can blind you as much as it protects you. In this town, trust became the veil under which something dark was allowed to grow. For years, the community's faith in their sheriff had been unwavering, their belief in his integrity unquestionable. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic small-town life, a storm was quietly brewing. It began with whispers that went unheard, subtle changes that went unnoticed. Little did anyone know, the man they looked to for safety and guidance was hiding a secret so explosive it would shatter the peace they took for granted. The cracks in the town's foundation were nearly invisible at first. An extra glance here, a hushed conversation there, small, seemingly insignificant moments that didn't draw attention. But as time passed, these cracks widened, revealing a truth that no one was prepared to face. The sheriff, the symbol of their trust and unity, was not the man they thought he was. Behind the badge and the warm smile lay a web of lies and deceit that would rock the town to its core. What happens when the protector becomes the predator? When the one person you trust the most is the one with the most to hide? In this town, the answer would come too late, and it would leave scars that would never fully heal. Sheriff Clayton Marshall wasn't just the face of the town's law enforcement. He was its moral compass, the steady hand that guided its people through both calm and chaos. A tall man with a commanding presence, Clayton carried himself with an air of confidence that made people feel safe. To those who knew him, he wasn't just the sheriff. He was a husband, a father, and a loyal friend. Married to Sharon for nearly 2 decades, Clayton was the kind of man who seemed to balance the weight of his badge with the warmth of family life. His 2 daughters, Ella and Grace, adored him. To Ella, the younger of the 2, her father wasn't just her dad. He was her hero. Ella and Grace grew up in a household that many envied. Their father's reputation brought a certain prestige to their family, while their mother Sharon, a kind-hearted homemaker, created an environment that was both loving and welcoming. Friends and neighbors often commented on how tightly knit the Marshalls seemed, a family that embodied the values the town held dear. It was this warmth that naturally extended to Ella's best friend, Monique Ellis, a spirited and ambitious teenager who had spent more time in the Marshall household than most people outside the family. Ella and Monique had been inseparable since childhood, a friendship built on countless shared experiences. They'd grown up playing in the Marshall backyard, staying up late for sleepovers, and whispering about their dreams and crushes under a blanket of stars. To Clayton, Monique was like a second daughter. He'd known her since the day she was born. Her father, Officer Jerome Ellis, was not only one of Clayton's most trusted deputies, but also a close family friend. Over the years, the Ellis and Marshall families had celebrated holidays together, shared backyard barbecues, and supported each other through life's challenges. Monique was as much a part of the Marshall household as any member of the family. She didn't knock before entering their home, and Sharon often teased her about raiding the fridge like it was her own. Jerome trusted Clayton implicitly. Their bond was forged over years of shared shifts, dangerous calls, and the unspoken camaraderie that comes with wearing the badge. Clayton had been there for Jerome through every milestone, from Monique's first birthday to the day she got her driver's license. In fact, Clayton had even helped teach her how to drive, a memory Monique fondly joked about whenever Jerome claimed to have taught her everything she knew. But what no one could have foreseen was how this closeness, this familial bond, would become the backdrop for something unthinkable. The lines between protector and predator would blur in ways no one expected, and the man who promised Jerome he'd always look out for Monique would betray that trust in the most unimaginable way. For now, though, the town saw only the surface: a family man, a devoted friend, and a sheriff who seemed to embody everything good about their small, tightly woven community. Beneath that surface, the story of Clayton and Monique was about to unfold, setting into motion events that would change both families forever. At first, there was nothing to raise an eyebrow, nothing to suggest that anything out of the ordinary was happening. Sheriff Clayton Marshall and Monique Ellis interacted in ways that felt completely natural, laughing at family gatherings, exchanging pleasantries at the Marshall household, and discussing her future plans during casual conversations. To anyone watching, theirs was the kind of dynamic you'd expect between a family friend and a trusted father figure. But sometimes, the most profound shifts happen in the smallest of moments, so subtle they're almost invisible, until they're not. It began as a series of small, almost imperceptible changes. Conversations that once took place casually in a room full of people started happening more often in private corners. When Monique visited the Marshall home, Clayton's attention toward her seemed slightly more focused, though never overtly suspicious. There were moments when their interactions lingered just a bit too long. A glance held for an extra second, a compliment delivered with an undertone that no one else seemed to notice. Monique, like many teens, often sought advice and guidance from adults she admired. Clayton, with his calm demeanor and fatherly presence, became a sounding board for her hopes and fears. Initially, their conversations revolved around school and college plans, lighthearted and encouraging, but over time, the topics grew more personal. Clayton began sharing stories about his own struggles, his doubts, and the pressures he faced. What had started as a mentor-mentee dynamic began to evolve into something more intimate. At first, neither of them seemed to notice the shift. It was so gradual, so quiet, that it barely registered as unusual. A casual text from Clayton to Monique, something about an article he thought she'd like, was brushed off as friendly. A conversation that continued long after everyone else had left the room was written off as normal. After all, Clayton had always been protective of Monique. To her, he wasn't just Ella's father. He was someone she looked up to, someone she trusted. But trust is a slippery thing, especially when it's placed in the wrong hands. The boundary between a caring adult and something far more complicated was crossed before anyone realized it had happened. What had once been innocent and familial began to take on a different tone, subtly at first, then undeniably. For Monique, there was no clear moment when she realized something had changed. It wasn't a single conversation or gesture, but rather the accumulation of countless small interactions that began to feel heavier, charged with a tension she couldn't quite name. For Clayton, the change seemed to embolden him. The sheriff, so practiced at keeping his emotions in check, began letting cracks show. Private texts turned into late-night messages. Moments of connection turned into meetings that were no longer casual. The shift, though invisible to most, created a ripple effect. Those closest to them, the Marshalls and the Ellises, remained oblivious, trusting Clayton and Monique implicitly. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, and this one was destined to erupt, leaving devastation in its wake. Every secret has its moment of exposure. a breaking point where the weight of concealment becomes unbearable and the truth forces its way to the surface. For Sheriff Clayton Marshall and Monique Ellis, that moment began with whispers. Small-town gossip, like wildfire, spreads quickly and ignites suspicion in places it might not otherwise reach. At first, the rumors were easy to dismiss, idle chatter with no real weight. After all, Clayton was the sheriff, a family man, a trusted figure. Who would dare accuse him of impropriety? But rumors have a way of sticking, of growing louder as they pass from one person to the next. The first to notice something amiss wasn't the community, it was Sharon, Clayton's wife. Sharon knew her husband better than anyone, and while she could explain away his late nights at the office or his extra time spent mentoring Monique, there was a nagging feeling in her chest she couldn't shake. The stolen glances, the hushed conversations, the moments Clayton seemed distracted even at home, it all felt wrong. Then there was Jerome Ellis, Monique's father and Clayton's close friend. Jerome had never questioned Clayton's relationship with his daughter. Why would he? Monique had practically grown up in the Marshall household, and Clayton had been a constant in her life for as long as she could remember. But now, Jerome found himself second-guessing the bond he'd once trusted implicitly. A comment from a neighbor, an offhand remark about how Clayton seemed awfully close to Monique, planted a seed of doubt in Jerome's mind. The moment of reckoning came not with a dramatic revelation, but with a single text message. Sharon had borrowed Clayton's phone to check something innocuous, as spouses often do. What she found was a message from Monique, nothing overtly incriminating, but just personal enough to feel inappropriate. The tone was too familiar, the words too intimate. It was enough to make Sharon's heart race and her hands tremble as she read it over and over. Confronting Clayton was like pulling teeth. At first, he denied everything, brushing off Sharon's concerns as paranoia. But Sharon wasn't imagining things, and the evidence was mounting. The messages continued, each one chipping away at the facade of the man Sharon thought she knew. She began piecing together the moments she'd overlooked. His sudden mood changes, the unexplained absences, the way he seemed to light up when Monique was around. When Sharon confronted Monique, the teen's reaction was telling. Caught off guard, Monique stammered through denials, her usually confident demeanor unraveling under the weight of scrutiny. Sharon's suspicions were now more than suspicions. They were the beginnings of a truth too devastating to fully comprehend. For Jerome, the realization was even harder to bear. Learning that the man he trusted with his daughter's safety had betrayed him in the most profound way was a blow that shook him to his core. Jerome's heartbreak was compounded by guilt. How could he not have seen this? How could he have allowed this to happen under his watch? As the truth began to unravel, it didn't just fracture the relationships between the Marshalls and the Ellises, it fractured the entire town. Clayton, once a symbol of integrity, now stood at the center of a scandal so shocking that people struggled to believe it was real. The community, reeling from the betrayal, was left to grapple with the question: how do you rebuild trust when the person you relied on most is the one who destroyed it? When the lines between right and wrong are crossed, it's only a matter of time before the consequences come crashing down. For Sheriff Clayton Marshall and Monique Ellis, the secret they tried so desperately to conceal began unraveling, setting off a chain of events that would lead to unthinkable tragedy. At first, Clayton tried to manage the situation, believing that his position of power could shield him. He downplayed the growing suspicions around him, maintaining his image as the steadfast sheriff. To outsiders, he appeared as composed as ever, a man dedicated to his duties and his family. But behind closed doors, the pressure was mounting. Sharon's icy demeanor at home, Jerome's sudden coolness during shifts, and the whispers of betrayal that seemed to follow him everywhere were impossible to ignore. For Monique, the fallout was equally intense. A once confident teenager with dreams of a bright future, she now found herself under an unwanted spotlight. Her once solid friendship with Ella became strained as the weight of her secret drove a wedge between them. Friends and classmates began to notice her sudden withdrawal, her nervous glances, and the way she avoided the spaces she used to occupy with carefree ease. Monique's world was shrinking, and she had no idea how to escape it. Then came the news that changed everything. Monique was pregnant. What might have been a joyful milestone for another young girl felt like a death sentence to Monique. The pregnancy was undeniable proof of what had happened, evidence that Clayton couldn't explain away or deny. For a man who had built his entire life on an image of integrity and respectability, the revelation threatened to destroy everything: his career, his family, and his carefully cultivated reputation. Clayton spiraled. What began as a calculated effort to control the situation turned into increasingly desperate behavior. He confided in no one, not even Sharon, whose suspicions had grown into certainty. Instead, Clayton became paranoid, lashing out at the smallest perceived threat. He began tracking Monique's movements, terrified that she might tell someone the truth. His fear turned to anger, and his anger to recklessness. Monique, meanwhile, was trapped in a nightmare. Confused and terrified, she didn't know where to turn. Clayton had always been her protector, the person she trusted most, but now he was someone she feared. She thought about confiding in her father, Jerome, but the shame and guilt weighed her down. She felt utterly alone, carrying a burden far too heavy for someone her age. The tragedy came to a head one fateful night when Clayton, consumed by panic and desperation, confronted Monique. Their meeting was supposed to be a chance to fix things, but the tension between them quickly escalated. The details of what happened next remain a chilling blur, but what is clear is that the confrontation ended in violence. Monique, the girl with her whole life ahead of her, was gone, and Clayton had crossed a line that could never be undone. The community awoke to news that would haunt them forever. The sheriff, the man they trusted with their lives, had become the perpetrator of a crime so heinous it defied belief. The loss of Monique left the town shattered, a grim reminder that the greatest dangers can sometimes come from within. In the wake of Monique's death, the town was plunged into a state of collective shock and grief. The initial disbelief was palpable. How could something so horrific happen in a place so tightly knit, where trust was the bedrock of every relationship? For years, Sheriff Clayton Marshall had been the embodiment of that trust, the man everyone believed would always protect them. Now, he was the symbol of its ultimate betrayal. The news rippled through the community like a stone dropped into a still pond. First came the whispers, then the full-blown headlines. The details of Clayton's relationship with Monique, her pregnancy, and the tragic confrontation were laid bare for the world to see. Those who had once admired him struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster he had become. Parents, who had once pointed to Clayton as a role model for their children, now looked at him with disgust and fear. For the Marshall family, the fallout was devastating. Sharon, who had already been grappling with suspicions about her husband, was left to face the reality that the man she had shared her life with was capable of such unimaginable actions. Her world crumbled under the weight of betrayal and shame. Clayton's daughters, Ella and Grace, bore the brunt of the town's judgment. Though they were innocent of their father's crimes, the shadow of his actions followed them everywhere. At school, in the grocery store, even in their own home, they were haunted by whispers and sidelong glances. For Jerome Ellis, Monique's father, the grief was unbearable. He had lost his daughter, his pride and joy, to the very man he had considered a close friend. The betrayal cut deeper than words could describe. As he stood at her funeral, staring at the small casket that held the girl he had once rocked to sleep, he was consumed by a mixture of sorrow and rage. How could he have let this happen? How could he have trusted Clayton so blindly? The community itself was left grappling with a broken sense of identity. The sheriff's office, once a beacon of safety, was now a reminder of betrayal. Neighbors who had always looked out for one another began to question the intentions of even their closest friends. The foundation of trust that had held the town together was fractured, and rebuilding it felt impossible. Legal proceedings against Clayton were swift but grueling. As the evidence mounted against him, the community was forced to relive the horror of what had happened. Testimonies from those who knew him painted a picture of a man who had hidden his darker impulses behind a carefully constructed facade. Yet, no amount of punishment could undo the damage he had caused. In the end, Monique's death became a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of how quickly trust can be exploited and destroyed. Her bright future, stolen in an instant, served as a rallying cry for the town to confront uncomfortable truths about power, authority, and the fragility of their community bonds. Though justice was served in the courtroom, the scars Clayton left behind were far deeper than any sentence could heal. For those left behind, life would never return to normal. Jerome's home was quieter now, filled only with memories of Monique's laughter and the echo of the life she should have had. The Marshall family, fractured beyond repair, tried to move forward in the shadow of Clayton's crimes. The town, once a symbol of harmony, became a place where trust was no longer given freely, and the wounds of the past lingered in every corner. Monique's legacy became a somber reflection of what the town had lost. Not just a vibrant young girl, but also its innocence, its unity, and its belief in the goodness of those meant to protect them. The story of Sheriff Clayton Marshall and Monique Ellis left an indelible mark not just on their small town, but on everyone who heard about it. In the aftermath of such a harrowing tragedy, people were left grappling with a question that refused to go away. How could this happen? How could a man who had sworn to serve and protect his community become the very source of its deepest betrayal? For many, the answers didn't come easily. Some pointed to the corrupting nature of unchecked power, arguing that Clayton's position as sheriff gave him a sense of invincibility, a belief that he could act without consequence. Others blamed the insular nature of the town itself, a place so rooted in trust that no one thought to question the man at its center. The sheriff's badge, once a symbol of honor, had become a shield for his darkest impulses, allowing him to manipulate and exploit the very people who looked up to him. Monique's death served as a haunting reminder of how trust can be weaponized, how predators often hide in plain sight, cloaked in respectability and authority. Her story became a rallying cry for accountability, sparking difficult conversations about power dynamics, the vulnerability of youth, and the dangers of blind faith in authority figures. Schools held assemblies to educate teens about recognizing manipulation and grooming. Parents found themselves having difficult but necessary talks with their children about boundaries and trust. The town, once a place defined by its tight-knit bonds, now bore the scars of its loss. Streets that were once alive with laughter and warmth now carried a somber air. The annual summer fair, which had always been a joyful tradition, was marked by a memorial for Monique, a poignant reminder of the fragility of the lives they cherished. The community struggled to heal, but healing was slow and incomplete. For every step forward, there was a lingering sense of what had been lost. For Monique's father, Jerome, the grief was unbearable, but also galvanizing. He became an outspoken advocate for justice, using his voice to ensure that no other family would suffer the way his had. In her name, he established a foundation aimed at protecting young people from exploitation, focusing on education, resources, and legal support. Though the pain of losing his daughter never faded, Jerome found purpose in ensuring her legacy would help others. As for Clayton Marshall, his fall from grace was swift and absolute. Once a revered figure, he became a symbol of betrayal, his name spoken only in anger or sorrow. His conviction brought some closure to the community, but did little to repair the damage he had inflicted. For his family, the aftermath was equally devastating. Sharon and the girls moved away, seeking a fresh start, far from the shadow of Clayton's actions. But no matter how far they went, the weight of his choices followed them. Monique's story became a lesson not just for the town, but for anyone who heard it. It was a reminder that evil doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you trust, someone you admire, someone you think you know. It taught a painful but necessary truth. Trust must be earned and carefully guarded, especially when it involves the vulnerable. The tragedy also underscored the resilience of those left behind. Though broken and battered, the town refused to let Monique's memory fade into obscurity. Her story became a symbol of change, a call to vigilance, and a plea for justice. The pain of her loss was profound, but so too was the determination to learn from it, to grow stronger as individuals and as a community. In the end, Monique's legacy wasn't just the sorrow of what was lost, it was the strength of what remained. Her name became a beacon, a warning, and a reminder of the price of misplaced trust. Though the town would never be the same, it carried her story forward, a testament to the lessons learned and the hope that such a tragedy would never happen again.